Welcome, current students, alumni, faculty, staff, and friends to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Center for Global Affairs in New York University's School of Professional Studies. Our program will now begin with a welcome from CGA's Associate Dean, Clinical Professor, and Faculty Lead for our Energy and Environment concentration, Dr. Carolyn Kissen.
Hello, everyone. Wow, it is so extraordinary to stand here and to see all of you. First of all, I want to extend my warmest welcome and my sincerest gratitude to all of you for coming out to help us mark our 20th anniversary, to celebrate this very important milestone, and to kind of recognize what we've done over the last 20 years. It truly is an honor to be here. I've been thinking a lot as we sort of think about the CGA and what we've accomplished over the last 2 decades, the evolution of our programs, and our thriving community. And all of you very much sort of represent that thriving community. We are innovative, we are passionate, and we are committed to change. Before I go into sort of diving into CGA's achievements and history, I also want to sort of take a moment because just today we are, of course, looking at some, the horrors or the impending horrors of Hurricane Milton, the devastation wrought by Hurricane Helene, and a host of other global issues and challenges. Later on, we'll hear from Dr. Richard Haass, who wrote a book called The World in Disarray, and I think when we look around, we see a lot of disarray. But we also see opportunities, and much of what the CGA is about is actually addressing those global challenges and thinking about innovative solutions. So back to why we are here. 20 years ago, the CGA was founded with a vision to empower the next generation of leaders with the tools, knowledge, and experiences to navigate a rapidly changing world. Today, that vision has blossomed into a dynamic global network of students, alumni, faculty, and friends committed to making a meaningful impact. We are deeply grateful to all of you. Many of you know our founder, former Divisional Dean Vera Jelinek, who, though she cannot join us tonight, is very much with us in spirit. Her energy and vision are imprinted throughout all we do. She emailed me this morning with this message, and here she is. Vera is in Japan. She is traveling with her grandson Angus, and she is here in this photo with Go Katayama. Some of you might know Go. Go graduated in 2013. And Go is also a member of our advisory board. And he is there with his wife, Yumi, and they are in Tokyo. And so they just had a beautiful evening together. In fact, I just got another text from Vera, and she is sad to miss this, but this is her message to all of us. Wishing you, faculty, staff, current and all past students, the very best for the next 20 years plus. I count CGA to be one of my top achievements, and I know that it will be surpassed by all of you. Wish I could be with you, but prior plans to visit Japan intervened. So tonight we really do think about Vera because, as I said, she very much is in our hearts, and she has been such a visionary around what she has done to create the CGA. So for myself, I have been privileged to be part of the CGA journey for the past 20 years, and I've had the unique opportunity to witness and help orchestrate its evolution. And in many ways, in the absence of Vera, I've taken on the role of the in-house historian, watching the arc of our story unfold. from the beginning in 2004 with a class of 69 students. This fall, we welcomed over 120, and with over 1,700 alumni working around the world. The CGA is a story of growth, adaptation, and an unwavering commitment to staying ahead of the curve in a world where change is constant. Our students, many of whom are here this evening, are at the heart of everything we do. We see them push boundaries daily, ask tough questions, and challenge the status quo. We are proud of our 2 master's programs, the flagship MS in Global Affairs and the newer MS in Global Security, Conflict, and Cybercrime, which we launched in 2019. These programs equip our students not only with knowledge, but also the practical skills and global mindset needed to lead in their fields. What also makes tonight very meaningful is reflecting on the challenges we faced over the past 20 years and how, in response, we've adapted, grown, and evolved. From 2004 to today, the world has undergone dramatic shifts. Geopolitical tensions, financial crises, the rise of new technologies, pandemics, and the increasing urgency of the climate crisis. These moments and more have shaped the global landscape and require positive responses from programs like ours. And I should also add, when we think about what differentiates the CGA, it is also our commitment to experiential learning. Our signature global field intensives and our consulting practica allow students to step out of the classroom and into the field. Our students work alongside local leaders to understand the complex realities of our world and propose innovative solutions. These experiences shape not only their careers, but also their worldviews. I should also add, in addition to our 2 master's programs, we have a wonderful portfolio of non-degree offerings, including certificates in fundraising, clean energy, monitoring and evaluation, and international development. And these certificates have expanded as a direct response to the changing needs of our world. We recognize professionals across sectors require new skills to tackle the evolving challenges of today. Whether it's raising funds for nonprofit initiatives, designing energy-efficient solutions, or developing strategies to measure the effectiveness of international projects. However, none of these would be possible without the amazing team I have had the pleasure of working with. Our faculty, our full-time and our adjunct faculty, and again, many of you are here this evening, and we're so deeply grateful. The graduate administrative team, who you saw coming in when you were checking in, some are moving around, but every day it is such a pleasure to come to the office and work with them. Our continuing education and public events team. Together, we have crafted a community where curiosity meets expertise, bold ideas are nurtured, and every student's professional journey is met with unwavering support. And when I think about that support, I also think about the privilege that we have of sitting within the School of Professional Studies. We have tremendous support from Dean Angie Kamath. Dean Kamath is actually right now in Indonesia, but she also sends her best regards. We'll have Josh Murray in a few minutes introduce Dr. Haass, but we're really grateful for the real leadership support that the CGA receives. And when it comes to our faculty are scholar practitioners, and they bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the classroom, and they continually push the boundaries of what our students can achieve. And our alumni, again, many of you who are here, carry the spirit wherever they go. They work across industries, governments, NGOs, the private sector, and international organizations. They are catalysts for change, leaders in global affairs, security, sustainability, and so much more. The professional trajectories our alumni have pursued from New York to Nairobi reflect the center's role as a global leader in education and innovation. Tonight is also a celebration of our friends, partners, and our advisory board, the organization and individuals who have supported our work, opened doors and shared their insights and expertise with our students. We could not have reached this milestone without you all. Thank you for your belief in our mission. And as we reflect on these 20 years, one theme stands out: adaptation and innovation. Whether it's the programs we offer, the research we conduct, or the partnerships we build, we are constantly evolving. Our work is guided by a commitment to creativity, collaboration, and community. And as we think about the next chapter, maybe the next 20 years, we do so with a sense of renewed purpose and passion. I'm looking here at one of my alums, Delane Mayer, who in a vision summit that we hosted in the spring, she talked about the CGA spark. And I think a lot about what she said and how we are committed to upholding that spark. So that spark that was ignited 2 decades ago, we hope will only grow brighter. So with that, I also just want to say that I am just so particularly thrilled and privileged to be here this evening. And I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to come out. I really want to thank all of you who support our students and who are committed to making a lasting difference in the world. We are so delighted to put together this program to highlight our faculty, to highlight our alumni, to show you a little bit, give you a picture of what some of our signature programs, our global field intensives, our consulting practica, and so much more. And we really do hope that when the official program is over, that you take the time to enjoy the reception, have a glass of wine, get to know someone that you haven't met before, and feel the CGA spirit that's so alive in this room. So thank you all so very much for joining us this evening. I'm going to hand it over right now. I think we have you're going to be introduced, Josh, but thank you all very much.
Please welcome Josh Murray, Associate Dean and Chief of Staff at NYU School of Professional Studies.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Congratulations and happy anniversary to all of you. And Carolyn, thank you so much for leading this program. Tonight, I bring greetings from Dean Angie Kamath, who this evening is in Jakarta to meet new students, to connect with our alumni there, and to develop new partnerships in the region. The Dean is extremely proud of the Center for Global Affairs and for the commitment you all have made to experiential learning and for the way you collaborate with our colleagues across the university to make NYU a champion of progress on global challenges. In my career at NYU, I've had the privilege to work alongside the world's greatest artists, scholars, teachers, and industry leaders. And now I can add diplomat to the list. It is my pleasure this evening to introduce to you Dr. Richard Haass, a veteran diplomat, scholar of international relations, senior counselor with Centerview Partners, and now distinguished university scholar for NYU School of Professional Studies. Dr. Haass is the President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations after having served as CFR's president for 20 years, in the State Department under Presidents George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, and at the White House under President George H.W. Bush, and at the Pentagon under President Jimmy Carter. He was the U.S. envoy to the Cyprus negotiations and the Northern Ireland peace process, and after 9/11, he was the coordinator for the future of Afghanistan. Dr. Haass is the recipient of the State Department's Superior Honor Award, the Presidential Citizens Medal, the Tipperary International Peace Award, the Order of Diplomatic Service from the government of South Korea, and the Order of the Rising Sun from the government of Japan. He is the author of 14 books on American foreign policy, 1 book on management, and 1 on American democracy. And at the beginning of this academic year, Dr. Haass delivered a masterclass to our new undergraduate students on his latest book, The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens. Dr. Haass, thank you for your leadership throughout your career and now for your ongoing service to the NYU community and for the Center for Global Affairs. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm clearly not an expert in navigating the New York City subway or finding 60 Washington Square South, but I made it. Good to be with you. Congratulations on turning 20, an important milestone. What I thought I would do is take a few minutes to try to talk about the world that existed 20 years ago when CGA was just the apple in its parent's eye, or 21 years ago, and where we are now, because the institution has come of age. So, think about it. Let's go back to 2004. That was 15 years into what we would call the post-Cold War world. The wall came down on all days 11/9 of 1989, which is as good a date as any to mark the end of the Cold War. It was a world in which the United States had a degree of measurable advantages over anyone else, over any conceivable combination of anyone else, that was really with little historical precedent. But just before then, we had the rude awakening of 9/11, which in some ways was a signal that being the most powerful country in the world is never to be confused with invulnerability. It showed that the United States was vulnerable. The United States then went into Afghanistan to remove the government that would not offer up Al-Qaeda to justice. And then, not long afterwards, the United States launched what I described as a war of choice in Iraq. And this was in early 2003. And what's significant about it is that we had if you will, the excess of capacity that American foreign policy had the luxury, but maybe not, of being able to do things not simply because it had to, but because it chose to. The focus with China was on, in many ways, contributing to its economic growth, because the widespread view, the assumption, was that as China developed, it would become so enmeshed in the international economy and the international system that it would never do anything to disrupt what had made it so wealthy. The view was inevitably that also China would mellow internally, become more open politically, and would pursue a moderate foreign policy, again, so as not to disrupt this world that in many ways was enabling its rise. With Russia, again, relations were fairly good. People forget that at the time of 9/11, Russia and China were very supportive of the United States, which had been attacked by terrorists. I was in the policy planning staff until the middle of 2003, when I came to New York to head the Council on Foreign Relations. But one of the memos we set up to the secretary and shared with the government, I think it was 2002, was the idea of offering Russia on certain terms NATO membership, something that now would be inconceivable. But again, then was a symbol, if you will, of the idea that relations with Russia still had, we thought, tremendous upside if it were managed correctly. And then when you looked around the world, 15 years after the end of really two Soviet empires. The Soviet Union was an internal empire consisting of a number of republics, one of which was Ukraine. And the Soviet Union was also an external empire, which was the Warsaw Pact. And with the disintegration of those two empires, the external and the internal, as well as with other trends, democracy was on the rise. Indeed, more people at that time were living in democratic or partially democratic societies than any time in human history. So you think about the backdrop to this institution, and you'd be hard-pressed to find what looked to be a more positive international moment. Flash forward 20 years later to today, it'd be hard to make that case. Indeed, what we see now is in some ways much more the familiar stuff of history. And rather than, like that famous or infamous essay written right after the end of the Cold War, rather than the end of history, we're seeing much more its return or its resumption. I wrote a book probably about 10 years ago, plus or minus, called A World in Disarray, in part to capture where things had moved 10 years after this institution were founded, but also to predict where things were heading. At the time, it was criticized by several for being too pessimistic. If there's a criticism to be made, it was probably too optimistic. So what's happened since? Overall, the degree of instability, disorder, unrest in the world, however you measure it, is significantly up. Real disillusionment with China, which did not become more open politically, more market-oriented economically, or more moderate in its foreign policy. In every one of those areas, just the opposite. Russia has launched multiple wars of aggression, Georgia, but more recently, 2014 and 22 in Ukraine. And indeed, Russia now, more than any other power, is alienated from what you might call the world that the United States has tried to foster since World War II and in the 7 decades since. Middle East, you don't need me to remind you, is essentially like a complicated earthquake zone with fault lines in Gaza, in the West Bank, Lebanon, between Israel and Iran, in Yemen, in Syria, you name it. North Korea has progressed with its acquisition and development of nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them. Iran has developed any number of proxies to promote instability, to inflict pain and cost on Israel, and also itself has moved fairly far in the direction of giving itself the option of developing or acquiring nuclear weapons. You have a new alignment, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. I've dubbed it the new Gang of Four, whatever else you want to call it. But this is now a group of countries, authoritarian countries, with the avowed purpose of working against the United States and working against the principles of the world we've set up. Indeed, all three of these countries, China, North Korea, and Iran, are helping Russia in its war of aggression against Ukraine. Paradoxically, at this time, we also have dozens and dozens of what you might call weak states. Countries with governments that cannot fulfill the normal responsibilities of sovereignty, to maintain order within their borders, to provide a basic standard of living for their residents and citizens. We see a lot of these in the Middle East. We see quite a few in Africa. We see quite a few in Latin America. Global challenges have been profound, whether it's financial crises, the 2007-8 crisis that grew out of the mishandling of mortgage debt in this country. More recently, obviously, the pandemic launched by the emergence of the COVID-19 virus. Climate change, a slow motion crisis that, even though it's moving slowly, is moving still at a pace the world is unable or unwilling to keep pace with. So the gap between what is being done and what needs to be done is large and getting larger. We're seeing that rather than what people hope was the world coming together, we're seeing many examples of deglobalization. The most recent round of global trade talks died, the so-called Doha round. And rather than seeing increasingly a global trading system with all sorts of arrangements and a judicial system for adjudicating disputes, we're seeing just the opposite. The global arrangement has broken down, replaced essentially by a patchwork quilt of multilateral or bilateral, or in many cases, no agreements. And the most interesting at all, the United States, which was the country that after World War II, after the Cold War, the 20 years ago when this was founded, which was the dominant country in the world, is itself increasingly at odds with itself. Politically divided, no consensus on how much of a role it ought to have on the world or what the direction of that role would be. And no longer, in many cases, able to set an example that it could persuade the rest of the world to follow. And what we're seeing is that when the United States is unable or unwilling to play a large role, no one else is willing or able to step up. So it becomes a world, if you will, without a successor to the United States, and again, increasingly disorderly. And I say this in full acknowledgement that the United States has made its share of mistakes when it overreached, but increasingly now you might argue the biggest challenge facing the United States is that of underreach. So where does that leave us going forward? What kind of a world are you going to have to contend with intellectually? Professor Kasana and her colleagues here, as this institution grapples with the next 20 years. Well, the good news, but also the bad news, is you're not going to lack for things to contend with. The inbox is full. For those of you who are planning on making international relations your career, you probably won't be unemployed because peace is going to break out universally. There's going to be a lot of things to work on wherever and however you decide to work on them. Many of the things are already visible, and I've just alluded to. But we are in an era of intense geopolitics. One of the unwelcome things of this era, unlike the last one, is nuclear weapons may play a larger role. We're seeing what you might call the vertical proliferation of weapons. The fastest growing nuclear arsenal in the world right now is China's. Second fastest is arguably probably North Korea's. Both the United States and Russia are modernizing their nuclear arsenals. The current arms control agreements are bilateral between the United States and Russia are due to expire in 15, 16 months. Not clear they'll be extended. These agreements don't capture China. So we could find ourselves facing all sorts of new challenges from nuclear weapons when we thought that was a problem of the past. At the same time, as I alluded to, you have countries like Iran knocking on the door. Global issues, we could still face future pandemics. The machinery for preventing them or dealing with them is, shall we say, not what it needs to be. Climate change, I've already alluded to. You've got new technologies, from cyber to things in the biotech sphere to obviously AI, where again, almost like some of these other global issues, the pace of change is far outrunning the willingness and ability of the world to come together, to push back against the threatening aspects and to embrace and scale up and share the constructive aspects of the technologies. Henry Kissinger once said about the Middle East that peace is at hand. I don't think if Henry were still alive, he would say that today, looking at the Middle East. And here in the United States, as I said, fundamental questions about our willingness to play a constructive role in the world and the election we're about to have in less than a month. What's so interesting about it, what's so uncharacteristic about it, is normally American elections for the presidency, to a lesser extent Congress, but still, you have a situation where the similarities, the commonalities in outlook about foreign policy between the candidates far outweighs any differences. That is not the case this time. And the world doesn't get a vote in the American election, but trust me, the world will be affected by it. And the two very different foreign policies, two very different relationships between the United States and the world are being put forward. So again, all of which is to say, for those of you in this field, this is about as interesting as it gets. When I was at your stage of my career, the foreign policy questions were really small and narrow because the basic first order issues, the tectonic plates of the world, you would wake up day after day and those wouldn't change. So the big debates, for example, might be detailed questions about this or that arms control agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union. What's so different about this moment is this is much more the stuff of history where the first order questions have come back to the fore. Really basic questions of war and peace, about what is the nature of international relations, what is the definition of order, will there be basic rules or norms, such as the non-acquisition of territory by force, that are respected, and when they are not respected, will be enforced. And one could go around, will the world be able to come together to deal with challenges that cross borders? And even if it's in the self-interest of countries, they seem unable to come together, and will that change? So this is actually one of those interesting moments in history where a lot is up for grabs. The ability to assume is simply not present. And in some cases, what happens in the next few years could have a very long tail. decisions that are made. And I'll leave you with one last point, and then I'll stop, since I promised I would not filibuster here, even though I worked in Washington a lot. What the last 20 years tell us, and if you've forgotten everything else I've said, remember this: there's virtually nothing inevitable in history. Yes, there's powerful forces, there's tectonic plates, big powerful countries, you name it. But to some extent, or to a large extent rather, where we are today was not inevitable compared to where we were 20 years ago. Where we are today is the result of decisions to do things or not do things made by certain governments, made by certain individuals in governments. And I would say the same thing going forward. So my message is not one of pessimism or despair, though it is one of concern, but it's a sense of agency. There's very little about history that's baked into the cake. And so it's good to see so many people in the room, and whatever your interaction is with these issues, whether it's as an academic, as a student, later as a professor, whether it's to go into this or that government, whether it's to work for an NGO, whether to be a journalist, whether it's to go into business. There's a powerful case for working on these issues because, one, you can make a difference, and two, whatever happens out there will affect things here. Someone should get rid of the phrase foreign policy because it's not foreign. It's essentially, there's no line there. We may have borders, but increasingly they're irrelevant when it comes to things moving in any direction. What happens out there affects things here and vice versa. So stay involved, stay interested, stay informed, and thank you for not just being here tonight, but for your interest in and involvement with this important institution.
Thank you. We now invite clinical professor and faculty lead of CGA's International Law and Human Rights concentration, Jennifer Trahan, to the stage.
Hi, everybody. So transitioning from those sobering remarks that present that you really have a lot of work to do ahead of you, whether you're students or alumni. We've left the world in quite a state, but you can make a difference, each and every one of you. So I'm here to talk about our global field intensives, and these are a part of CGA that I think is really special. And I've had the great privilege of leading 8 of them. I did 5 with Professor Belinda Cooper to The Hague, Bosnia, Serbia, focused on accountability in the former Yugoslavia, and I've led 3 to Rwanda, focused on justice and reconciliation. And the GFIs present a really unique opportunity for students to go in the field with professors and meet NGOs, government officials, survivors, victims, tour sites. They're really a fantastic opportunity. I hope the students who are still with CGA avail yourselves of this opportunity. And we have a brief video to show you. Thanks.
When I talk to students who are interested in the Center for Global Affairs, I always make a point of emphasizing our global field intensives.
The global field intensives really provide students with an opportunity to get out into the field and see places that they obviously otherwise would not get a chance to see.
You absolutely have to have experience working in the field in order to really know if this is something for you.
Usually there's a concentration that's associated with the field intensives. We have field intensives that focus on energy and environmental policy, that focus on global economy, that focus on transnational security. So students who are in that concentration or students who are interested in that concentration can take a global field intensive and then have a very immersive experience.
The global field intensive in China was on environmental and energy security.
We went to the United Arab Emirates and we were looking at gender and sustainable development in the region.
I also did a global field intensive in Costa Rica and Panama. It was an environmental peace building GFI.
I specifically went to India. I was in India for 14 days. I went to Delhi, I went to Bangalore, I went to Agra. I specifically looked at international development, so I was specifically interested in rural healthcare and education.
In the Japan Global Field Intensive, we're mainly looking at comparative energy politics.
I did one in South Africa and then most recently in India.
In the summer, I'm going to be going on a global field intensive to Tanzania and Uganda, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. We're going to be working with NGOs and going to some refugee camps to really see how people are dealing with those problems.
We all have professional contacts and colleagues in the different places where we work. Almost everybody on the faculty has an active professional area of interest that they are still quite involved in that's outside of their day-to-day academic life.
Our professor, she really went above and beyond in terms of connecting us with really fascinating people who live and work in the UAE and really allowing us to see all the different ways in which gender and sustainability play out in that country.
You're in corporate offices, you're in government offices, legal offices, where this is now the conversation. So we got access to something that wasn't just the party line.
They are made aware of these different careers and these different approaches to looking at issues.
After the field intensive, I had a better understanding of what healthcare is like in India and how that affects their full potential for their youth and for their women especially and their marginalized community.
You could read all you want about AIDS in South Africa, but until you actually go there and you meet these young people, there's no substitute for having boots on the ground and experiencing that for yourself.
You interview people and you meet people and you try to understand where they're coming from and what issues they face and how you can find holistic solutions to problems that they've been facing for years.
If a student can take advantage of the global field intensives, it usually proves to be one of the most significant highlights of their time at the center.
We'd now like to invite tonight's panelists to the stage and Yashwani Kularia, the MSGA Student Association for Global Affairs President, to introduce tonight's panel.
A very good evening to all of you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you, share this evening celebrating not only the 20th anniversary of the Center for Global Affairs, but also the shared passion and the vibrant community which makes the CGA truly exceptional at NYU. My name is Yashwani Kularia. I'm an international student hailing from India. I'm pursuing MS in Global Affairs with a concentration in transnational security, and I'm also undertaking specialization in United Nations and data analytics. I'm also thrilled to be serving as the president of the Student Association of the Global Affairs at the CGA. As the student organization, SAGA represents the diverse MSGA student body by actively making connections between the academic pursuits of global affairs and the practical political landscape, which is facilitated through networking and career-building events. In addition, SAGA also oversees the 8 MSGA concentration subclubs, each dedicated to the professional interests in the fields such as global gender studies, transnational security, energy, peacekeeping, international development, IR, global economy, international law, and human rights. As students and professionals working in this dynamic field, we are navigating through profoundly changing times. In conjunction with the 2 years of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, we just remembered the anniversary of October 7 attack just 2 days ago. We are living in an era defined by shifting power dynamics, making it essential for us to understand the parallels at play. This sets the stage for this fascinating panel discussion lined up for us this evening on the theme of what is power in the 21st century. This panel will explore how the concept of power is being redefined through the shifts in the global geopolitical landscape, the rise of new global players, and technological advancements. The US-led world order is transitioning into a multipolar system shaped by competing ideologies and emerging technologies. In this context, we must consider the questions such as, how will we navigate the balance of hard and soft power in a fragmented global system? Can we sustain a stable and prosperous world order through institutions crafted for a different era? What role does China play in reshaping the global dynamic, particularly when we see the power and demographics shifting towards the global south? And moreover, how does the emerging arenas of competition, such as the digital landscape and the space exploration, influence the global politics and trade? This panel is just not about who wields the power. It also explores how the power is exercised and contested in this rapidly changing world. Before we delve into this intriguing discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce to all of you our distinguished panelist and the esteemed host for this panel. Professor Chloe Dombrowski, who will be moderating this panel. She is an adjunct instructor and executive in residence at the NYU CGA, where she leads the MSGA Global Economic Concentration. Following that, we have our panelists, Professor Michael Oppenheimer, who is a clinical professor at CGA, where he leads the IR Futures Concentration. He also oversees the research and consulting project for the UN Security Council's Counterterrorism Executive Directorate. Then we have Professor Sylvia Meyer, who is an academic director and clinical professor in the Center of Global Affairs. She leads the MSGA concentration in Global Gender Studies, and she is also a faculty advisor to the Gender Working Group. Then we have Dr. Olajumok Jumo Ayandele, who is a visiting assistant professor of practice at Center for Global Affairs. She has recently been recognized to be a recipient of the distinguished NYU Public Voices Fellowship. And then we have Dr. John Kane. He is a clinical professor at CGA and an affiliate faculty member of the NYU Department of Politics. He also leads the data analytics specialization at CGA. And finally, we have Rory Daniels, who is the managing director of the Asia Society Policy Institute. She is also a senior fellow at the Center for China Analysis, and she is also a celebrated CGI alum, having successfully completed her MSGA in 2012, concentrating in IR. A very warm welcome to each one of you. It's truly a pleasure to have you join us this evening. With that, I'm delighted to turn it over to Professor Dombrowski to kickstart our panel.
Thank you, Yashwani. Good evening, everyone. So, as usual, Dr. Haass has me very scared. And so I would love to have some Targaryen-style dragons or rings of power, but I guess that's not very likely outside of my favorite streaming services, so I will have to look for other sources of power. One thing that certainly does give me hope is the students we have at the CGA, and seeing you and conversing with you gives me lots of hope for the future. And I'm also delighted to be among such distinguished faculty and alums who are guiding lights for how we navigate it. So I'd like to jump right in and talk about the concept of power. How is that evolving in the 21st century? Because we are almost a quarter of the way through it at this point. And to kick us off, Michael, how has the concept of power evolved in the 21st century? How does it differ from the last century? And as an expert in soft power, how are we focusing more on soft power above economic or military might? Is that possible today?
Thank you. Thanks for the question, which we crafted together. So I'm not
Spoiler.
I'm not surprised by it. You know, listening to Richard Haass, whose organization I've been a member of for almost 40 years. I may sound a little bit like him. I mean, obviously, a fair amount is rubbed off, Richard, and I'm thankful for that. The concept of soft power was introduced, coined, made famous by Professor Joseph Nye at Harvard, who's now Emeritus Professor at Harvard, in his 1991 book called Bound to Lead. He subsequently refined the concept over many years. I don't think he's written 14 books, but he's come close. It's important when adapting these ideas and using them to be aware of the context in which they became popular. So let's remember 1991, end of the Cold War, a period of extraordinary optimism in the United States, a triumph which many, especially liberal observers of international relations, attributed not just to our hard power, but to our virtue. In a sense, we deserve to lead. That's basically the title of Nye's book. And that was based on the experience of this collapse of this enormous superpower, the Soviet Union, which we considered to be monolithic and unassailable, and which suddenly imploded, giving rise to this extraordinary decade of the 1990s of year-to-year economic growth, the advance of neoliberal globalization, the expansion of democracy, and a period of American hegemony, which many of Nye's and other liberals' point of view represented a permanent reflection of American exceptionalism. That was Nye's version of soft power. He didn't suggest that hard power was irrelevant. He simply indicated that we had to consider soft power in understanding the overall balance of power in the world. As Richard pointed out earlier, all those attributes of the 1990s, labeled by Francis Fukuyama famously or infamously as the end of history, all those conditions have changed. And in a quite extraordinary and relatively sudden way, from American hegemony to, or at least towards multipolarity, from a neoliberal economic market-based globalization to the weaponization of globalization, when states that are interdependent with other states use the instruments of globalization to inflict harm on their adversaries. A period that we thought in the 1990s was the beginning of a long period of great power peace, deteriorating into increasing great power conflict. And as Richard pointed out, a rapid advance in the number of democracies in the world, now having turned 180 degrees towards democratic retrenchment, authoritarianism on a roughly 15-year winning streak, with our own democracy in crisis, and the viability of that system very much on the ballot in 4 weeks. So we've come a very long way from the environment in which Joseph Nye introduced this term. And the question is, do we have to basically abandon it? This is clearly a hard power world we're living in. All you have to do is observe it, and so I don't think any further explanation is necessary. It's a violent world. It's a world in conflict. It's a world that is trending towards increasing conflict, particularly in the area of potential nuclear proliferation. If a certain candidate wins this next election, and the result is increasing insecurity in the world, which it will, the temptation of those states who currently depend on American security guarantees and American military presence will immediately be tempted to go nuclear. So do we abandon the term, or do we redefine it? And I think the answer is to redefine it. It is in effect a level playing field for soft power. There are other countries that have soft power. There are other systems, economic, political, social systems, that make a valid claim for working pretty well. Obviously, the example is China. Even as our own system is having trouble making its typical kind of exceptionalist case. So with a level playing field, what are the attributes of attractiveness, that's Joe Nye's word, in this world of heterogeneity, multipolarity, instability, and so forth? And that's what the rethinking has to be. And I'm happy when you come back to me again later to talk about what some of the criteria for that might be. But we have to find a way of disengaging or detaching ourselves from this idea that democracy is inherently an irreversible built-in advantage in extending our influence, because it is not that any longer.
Well, Michael, I did talk about you all being the guiding lights leading us into a brighter future. That was a little bit of a downer.
You didn't say that, did you?
A little bit. But Sylvia, I think, can help me out maybe, because perhaps a bright spot has been increasing gender equality. And as an expert in this area, how do nations that champion gender equality use it as a form of soft power? And can gender equity drive global influence in diplomatic and cultural arenas?
Thank you, Chloe. Beautiful question, wonderful question that I'm happy to answer. And listening to Michael and Dr. Haass also made me reflect on how far gender in international affairs and the field of feminism in IR and our concentration in global gender studies has come. We launched the concentration in 2015, so we'll be celebrating our 10th birthday next year, and I hope you will be celebrating with us. And it also makes me think and reflect that 10 or just 15 years ago, the question that you were asking, Chloe, right now about the relationship between gender equality, soft power, and the role of gender in international affairs probably would not have been a topic that would have been discussed in an event such as this. It really started out 20 to 15 years ago, like working backwards in academia, and now it is unthinkable to talk about international relations and international politics, power, hard power, and soft power without introducing a gender lens, which leads me to answering your question. So never give an academic a microphone on a panel.
It's inevitable at a university,
Absolutely, 100%. Let me begin by answering the question in this way. Gender equality and the promotion of gender equality is and must be an end in itself. It cannot and must not be principally a means to an end, exercising a country's or expanding a country's soft or hard power. Secondly, there is clear and ample evidence that the more gender equal a country is, the more prosperous and stable it is. So gender equality is good politics. It's good for business and it's smart politics. And it's really not surprising, and this is where the positive, the uplifting part comes in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's really not surprising that in the Global Soft Power Index, countries that are more gender equal, such as countries in Scandinavia, in the European Union more generally, like Germany, like France, my home country, Austria, other countries such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, rank very, very highly in terms of gender equality. Other countries, and we will talk about them a little bit later, that are also ranking very highly in the soft power index, but do not yet have a very high level of gender equality, are the UAE, Qatar, and the KSA, Saudi Arabia. So how is the influence that these countries have, primarily their economic power? The European Union refers to itself as a civil power. How do these countries use their soft power? In multiple ways, in some very positive ways. Some of them are a little bit more self-serving, and we get to that in a moment. So principally, soft power is used in development policies and in partnerships, principally with countries in Africa, but also in countries in Latin America, with a focus on sustainable social development, sustainability, education, more directly women's inclusion in the labor force, politics and peace building, global public health, food security, climate change, and also migration management.
It is also used, and this is really a very, very interesting and very positive development, used in conversations bilaterally as well as multilaterally, how to accelerate rethinking and reimagining. And I know, Michael, this is going to be an uphill struggle, but as Professor Haass said earlier, our inbox is full, but we will be able to manage it. We have no other choice and no other option anyway, is to rethink the meaning of security and to really move from traditional notions of security, national security, military might, to human security, which is a much more human-centered, comprehensive way of understanding security. Now, in the interest of time, just a few high points, and if you want to take away a few talking points for thinking points for later. What are some concrete examples of the positive use of soft power in the promotion and gender equality and vice versa? So these are really two sides of the same coin. First, the United States, Germany, France, and Mexico have expressed their commitments to a feminist foreign policy. Germany has just outlined its feminist development policy, which is absolutely unique. I think it's absolutely brilliant, with a focus on sustainable development. Some of the financial support, and I won't get too technical here, is tied to positive and negative conditionality, as it's called. So that means positive conditionality, if you do as we tell you to do, and this is problematic for a whole host of reasons, we will give you more money, you get preferential access, to our market, you get visa access, and so on. Negative conditionality, well, is negative conditionality. If you don't do as we tell you to, money will be taken away, access will be taken away. Very importantly, and I don't know if my wonderful colleague Anne-Marie Goetz is in the audience. Hi, Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie is working very intently with a working group of women from all over the world on getting the ICJ to condemn what the Taliban are doing against women in Afghanistan right now as gender apartheid. So with another exercise of soft power and their reputation in that space, Germany, Canada, Australia, and the Netherlands are setting or have just initiated legal proceedings against the Taliban before the ICJ. The UAE, the KSA, and also Qatar have used their approach of promoting gender balance and gender equality in their countries to serve as a model for other countries in the region, and they have been quite successful. We may not agree with their domestic policies, but they have been very successful in that particular region. According to the annual or biannual Arab Youth Survey, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, are the #1 country that young people in the region want to move to. And they've been, again, as I said, very successful in attracting top talent because of their commitments to advancing gender balance. The word women's rights, women's empowerment, gender equality is not used. The term gender balance is used. Now, final thought. What is the takeaway from all of this? What would I ask everybody to take away? All of these developments are nice and good. Development policies focusing on women's empowerment have moved the needle, especially in countries in the global south. It has improved the reputation and the standing of many countries in the European Union for good and for ill. What it also tells us, however, that the hard work needs still to be done. We cannot bring about fundamental change in the international system, thinking about security, thinking about development, finding solutions to climate change, the climate crisis, to AI, to global pandemics, without developing a critical mass of women in leadership positions in politics and economics, in the cultural sphere. This is where our inbox is really full for us as women leaders in academia, and beyond, as well as for our allies. And the last word for that is please vote. Please vote on November the 5th. I certainly have a desired outcome, but as long as people go to the polls, that's totally fine. Vote your conscience, vote your heart, but we need more women in power. Clearly what's happening right now isn't working, and we need to right the ship a little bit, and we can do it always. Thanks, Chloe.
Okay. So some bright spots there, Sylvia. Women can drive in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia now, just as we're getting driverless taxis in San Francisco and other places. All very exciting forms of progress. Rory, such a pleasure to have a fellow alum on the stage. Actually, we have quite a few. We have John, me, you, and Jumo, can we claim you? I know you're Wagner, but okay, fine. We'll claim you anyway. Violet, yay. So lots of NYU alumni. Anyway, it has already come up a few times, it's inevitable, right? But the rising power of China has really surged. It's been a stunning rise to power. So how is that reshaping the global order, and what does Chinese power look like in the 21st century?
Wonderful questions. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really lovely to be back with the CGA community. I'm a think tanker, so I'm going to give you the simplest answer possible and then my opinion on it for 5 minutes. That's how we work. The simple answer is that multipolarity simply gives states more options in the international system. And that's really changed the way that America or any very powerful country can use and exercise power in the international system. So when we look at things that the US wants to do, it wants to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. What it sees is that it no longer has the kind of global buy-in of all of the states that are necessary to put sufficient pressure on Russia to come to the table. And part of that is that there is a Russia-China relationship that is, I think, more than transactional and less than no limits, but somewhere in between, where Russia has options with China. It has options with India, another rising power that gets a lot less attention from China, but I guarantee if anybody wanted to invest in their future in international relations today, study India, because we'll be having this same conversation we're having about China, about India in 20 years. When we look at Iran in the Middle East, we also see countries that have more options. There simply isn't a dragnet the US can now place over countries to contain their behavior. And that is due to the system that we have set up, engendered, solidified through globalization to, make a more multipolar world. And we're experiencing that in the US as the decline of our power, but it's really only its relative decline. It's time for us to change. It's time for us to think about other ways to use power. It's time for us to use influence and capabilities to get more buy-in for the goals that we want. And it's time for us to use more diplomacy to get us to that end rather than coercive pressure. Does China want to undermine the international order? This is a question I get asked a lot. I think no, it does not. It benefits from many features of the international order. But it does want to undermine the way that the US has used power in that system. And we're seeing China do that as it contests for positions in global leadership organizations, as it attempts to use tools of rhetoric, perhaps, in the United Nations and in other places to build an argumentative case for protecting what it sees as its core interests that sometimes conflict with the interests of the US and the Western-led liberal international order. But China isn't the US, and it's not growing up in a world where it is a unipolar actor or is likely to be a unipolar actor anytime soon. So it's also facing a lot of balance of power challenges. I took international relations from Mike Oppenheimer 14 years ago, or something close to that, and learned about, yeah, I know. Both of us. I learned in that class about Hans Morgenthau. I was a career changer. My undergrad degree is in screenwriting, so if anybody out there also found that international relations was your second path, trust me, it can all work out. But we learned about Hans Morgenthau in Professor Oppenheimer's class, then I went to work for an organization founded by Hans Morgenthau. And in that organization's archives found the most delightful quote, which I will now share with you. I'm paraphrasing because I did not memorize it. But he said in the early 1970s, balance of power is like the law of gravity in international relations. You can choose to ignore it if you wish, but woe be unto you if in doing so you step out the international relations equivalent of a third-story window. Balance of power will exact the same toll on you as gravity will in the physical world. And that is exactly what China is facing. As China exercises its power, particularly as it exercises its power coercively, it's drawing balancing forces back to the United States. And that is how we find ourselves locked into what seems like an ever-expanding, never-ending strategic competition with China, as the rest of the world tries to manage these two somewhat mercurial major powers that have coercive power to get halfway to what they want and are using that power manipulatively in order to advance their own interests. It does not help anything that, the US is seen as relatively unreliable in the world. That has to do with the breakdown between a foreign policy that, there's a domestic policy that stops at the water's edge, and then we do foreign policy and our own domestic situation. So while I think the Biden administration deserves a lot of credit for pulling US alliances together to build that balance of power strategy against China, to create a favorable balance of power, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, to advance US interests, those allies are also pulling together against US unreliability. So we have to be really careful in this moment and really humble about the limits of our power in the world and why countries are organizing in the way that they're organizing. But I think if we can do that, there are lots of really interesting opportunities for the US to use its still considerable power, still the #1 economy in the world, still the #1 military power in the world, to affect some positive change, to work on the list of issues that are in our inbox, and ultimately to manage a relationship with China where there's at least peaceful coexistence, if not some sort of cooperation on our common interests.
Well, thank you for that. I am sure that our new technology battles will have an impact on that balance of power moving forward in the 21st century. Certainly, AI will. But in this world of multipolarity, other countries have many options to follow. And so what does that mean for emerging powers in the global south, Jumo, as they think about their own security and economics, particularly given the very young demographics in many of these countries?
Yes, thank you so much, Chloe, for that question. And the Global South is very huge. I'm going to narrow it down to Africa because that's my specialization.
That's still not very small.
54 countries. Africa is not a monolith. But I really want to talk about what you had said, population growth, and how that is going to shape power relations in the future. And I know when we talk about rising powers, we don't necessarily think about the continent as a whole. But by 2050, Africa is going to have 2.5 billion people, and it's estimated to be a quarter of the global population. And with more population comes more influence. We cannot discount that, especially when we are thinking about the global economy, right? So we're going to have about 790 million young Africans joining the global workforce. And this is also connected to the economic clout that Africa is going to have, especially when we think about clean energy and critical mineral resources, right? So the continent, as at now, holds about 30% of mineral reserves. And we use that for our everyday lives when it comes to our smartphones, when it even comes to our defense systems. And we can't take that away from the continent as a whole. And the continent knows this, that it is going to play a very significant role in the near future. And it's also aware that it has options nowadays, right, as you had said. We have China, we have Russia, yes, we do have the West, but right now it's a situation of we want to sit at the table and we want to change how we view security and global governance. And I do think this really goes into what is happening or what just concluded with the UN General Assembly a few weeks ago with that push for reform for the P5. And Africa is saying, Africa not being a monolith, Africa is saying that it wants a seat at the table when it comes to the Security Council. When we see all the resolutions that are passed, when we see what is being debated with the P5, it takes up about 70% of what we talk about. So how come we are not seated? How come we don't have veto power? That's contentious because some people don't necessarily feel that with veto power comes change, but it's a step in the right direction, in my own humble opinion, when it comes to shaping global governance. And yes, we do still have our challenges. Yes, we have our conflicts. We do have, our young population that might be mobilized or recruited by transnational actors. But I do feel, especially when we think about soft power, when we think about US-Africa relations, this reform that has been backed by the US, it's in good measure. It's a good way to show that we are serious about having Africa come to the table. And in my own opinion, it's not reactive. Some people might see it as a way to counter Russia and China, but it's also showing that pro-leadership that the United States is known for in really, really trying to promote what will be one of the big powerhouses in the 21st century. I'm going to stop there.
Well, you did put in there a reform of the Security Council, so that was already a big ask, Jumo. John, everyone loves to talk about ourselves, so let's talk about the US a little bit and the upcoming US election. So a recurring theme has been that we've been spending way too much time thinking about our global leadership role, too many global wars. There's been a lot of talk about retrenchment and focusing on US domestic politics instead. So how will this very soon forthcoming election potentially impact our position of power on the world stage?
Thank you so much. I think that this is an interesting election because there's not a lot of mystery to how both candidates would govern. We have a little bit of insight about exactly what they would do, right? One candidate has already been president and one is currently the vice president, right? So there's not a lot of mystery left there in terms of what they would do. I like to think of it as kind of one party is sort of international cooperation curious, and the other one is just not into that at all. And so those are kind of the decisions, that we have to decide between. I don't know if you know this, but most Americans, believe it or not, are not deeply engaged with international affairs. I'm not sure if that's breaking news or anything to you, but I think that it's useful to reflect on that sometimes to make some sense of how this election is looking and why it's looking the way it's looking. In many ways, one candidate, Donald Trump, is benefiting, I think, from a world that to most Americans just probably seems completely insane. That things have gone haywire, and very much to Rory's point and some of the other points, that it just seems beyond what the US is capable of influencing anymore. Like this is just out of our hands. And so if that's true, a not irrational response to that is just to kind of wash our hands of it and say, well, there's nothing we can do about this. Let's just focus on what's going on here and turn inward. So I think that there's a substantial amount of the US public that resonates pretty clearly. And maybe part of that same public likes to hear simple solutions to this. And so you have one candidate who in many ways is promising pretty easy solutions to some of these things. For example, what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Israel and Palestine. If you were to take Donald Trump seriously for a few minutes, it sounds like all of this stuff could be fixed with a phone call or two. That's all it will take, is just him to get on the phone and solve this. I'm not sure how many Americans truly believe that, but I'm confident that they want to believe it. And so in a world like that, this type of candidacy sounds very appealing. So that would be one point. And on top of that, the international situation is going on. This kind of chaos is probably benefiting him in a lot of ways. And then, of course, what's going on domestically is likely benefiting him in a number of ways. So there are some real domestic concerns that are at a level that we haven't really seen before that probably merit a lot of attention. And so to say something like, forget about the UN or NATO or anything like that, let's focus on what's happening here. Again, that resonates probably with a lot of people. So immigration, very high inflation that we were dealing with, of course it's come down now, but it's still something that Americans are struggling with. Inflation, the rate has gone down, but prices continue to go up. And so this is a concern. Things like the national debt, which in the past was probably more of a kind of conservative talking point, because of COVID and also enormous tax cuts, the national debt is starting to get to levels where even progressive economists are a little bit concerned about it. These things do require some attention. So, again, most Americans probably aren't thinking about the ramifications of allowing, say, what it would mean for the world if Russia can invade the Ukraine under any sort of pretenses, and what that would mean for the rest of the world. I don't know that many Americans are thinking that way. They're probably thinking about other things sort of closer to home. And what's sad about that to me especially is because obviously so many things in the world require U.S. buy-in and require massive international cooperation to solve them. So just earlier, thinking about something like Hurricane Milton, it's so sad because that is a moment where, and this is a moment where the U.S. could realize how much it really has in common with all the rest of the world that's been struggling with climate change, that's been hit so hard in so many ways by climate change. And we could realize that that's us too now, that we're feeling that too. But we don't. We instead turn inward. We start blaming FEMA or the administration or using whatever line of political attack we can to hopefully score some last-minute points before the election. And that's a sad situation. And again, I think that it kind of provides that feeling of chaos that to many voters, it becomes appealing to have a candidate promise some quick, easy solutions to end the chaos, both internationally, both domestically. And so, although all of us who care about international affairs a lot realize the dangers of a U.S. who completely closes the curtains on the rest of the world, I don't think it is all that mysterious as to why most Americans maybe aren't thinking like us. Thanks.
Okay, so maybe there's already been some progress on simple solutions. If Bob Woodward is to be believed, there have already been 7 phone calls between Trump and Putin to fix this. Yeah. So we're in good hands. So for this next round of questions, I'm going to ask you to refrain from, graduate seminar waxing poetic and think more like TikTok reel short, threads short, okay? Let's try. So, Michael, do we need a more pragmatic, performance-based understanding of power, and especially of soft power?
I feel badly. I feel badly that I inadvertently depressed you with this sad talk first time through. So I'll try to give a happier talk with the 5 minutes that I have.
Thank you.
I don't believe that soft power has disappeared from the range of capabilities that countries need to succeed in international politics. I think soft power is important. My point was that it needs to be redefined away from the democratic exceptionalist assumptions that motivated Joe and I, and that many people accepted as conventional wisdom in the 1990s. As I said, the soft power playing field is leveled. I think that's a good thing. I think that's a source of motivation to make our system work. But we have to go in somewhat kind of agnostically in terms of whether it works or not, or whether it will work. So making it work doesn't simply mean asserting the inherent superiority of democracy. It means proving it. Can you solve problems? Can you grow your economy? Can you distribute the rewards of that growth equitably? Can you deal with the problem of intergenerational income immobility that now characterizes our economy? Can you respond to emergencies, of which there are a growing number, right? Can you make good decisions? I mean, this is one of the key elements in Nye's kind of triple definition of the contents of soft power. It's your politics, it's your culture, and it's your ability to make smart decisions, especially decisions involving the use of force. And the more the world becomes a hard power world, with the seemingly sort of profligate use of force globally, the more the premium becomes, how do you govern your hard power? I mean, this is, Richard, again, you referred to this earlier, that there's always a temptation, if you have a lot of power, to use it. You become the hammer looking for a nail. And you don't restrain it. We thought we were special in that we had internal constraints on the use of our hard power, right? We had checks and balances, we had laws, we had civil society, we had an active marketplace of ideas that fed new ideas into the system. So we were special in the sense that we knew how to handle all that power, right? And we did it not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of mankind. And then we invaded Iraq, right? Which was clearly a war of choice, unnecessary, and in my view, catastrophic, both in terms of its effect on the Middle East and
I thought you were going to be more optimistic.
I am being more optimistic.
Okay, I see.
Being optimistic starts with realism, okay? And then when you figure this out, all right, when you're able to identify the issues, then by all means go about solving them. So a new definition of soft power,
Okay.
which the United States hopefully will endorse and will meet.
Okay, so given that, Rory, China has made a lot of investments, economic investments, for example, throughout the global south. So how is it using this sort of economic power, and what does that mean for traditional Western-led alliances?
I think that China's relationship with the global south is very reflective of its domestic priorities. So what it had done in the era when economic development was its top priority was to position itself between the developing and the developed world as kind of the lever, the fulcrum between them. Work with the global south on infrastructure and investment in order to get raw inputs into the Chinese economy, manufacture things that are needed, sell them to Western markets. And that, from my perspective, is a absolutely fantastic strategy for using order to create power. It worked very well for China. China's priorities have changed quite a bit. Therefore, its relationship with the global south and other countries is changing. China is no longer prioritizing economic development above all other things. It's really prioritizing national security, particularly regime security, but as an extension of regime security, national security. And that means that its relationship with countries in the global south is changing. I think a really good example of this is its relationship with the Solomon Islands. A wonderful piece in Foreign Affairs earlier this year by Sheena Greitens and Isaac Carden on how countries are increasingly looking to China for their internal security needs. And I think that is really challenging for the Western-led order, particularly for the U.S. alliance system. You no longer have a China that feels its needs to tamp down its nationalism, its national security needs in order to create this market strategy that's giving it, wealth and power. Instead, you have a system that's very comfortable reaching into other countries and helping them with their own internal security needs. So it's a massive change, but we could argue that China is quite pragmatic in this. It does not actually see regime type as the determinant factor of how it conducts its partnerships overseas, but it does like authoritarian governments because they absorb all the irritants that come from working with China, because it brings in its own labor, because it takes land, because it does not conduct environmental impact assessments, and therefore there are costs to working with China to develop these areas. But I think increasingly you're going to see China leverage that partnerships that it's built through infrastructure to do more, to create more value for other products that it has, whether that's internal security, AI tools, toolkits for controlling populations, or on the positive side of the ledger, it's clean energy and clean technology.
So other powers, other countries have options in this world. And at the Council on Foreign Relations recently, the Nigerian foreign minister came, and I remember distinctly that he said, this was during UNGA week, and he said, we're friends with everybody, right? So that seems to be an approach. Jumo, do you think that's the right approach? You interviewed him recently too.
Yes. Wow. That's a interesting one. I'm going to take a very nuanced view about this. And China's relationship with a lot of African countries and what this means for the West. When I talk to a lot of African leaders and I ask them, who would you rather aid from? A lot of times, the way they couch it is, from the West, it feels like neocolonialism. From China, it feels like a business relationship. And when you understand this perspective, you then realize why African leaders have the kind of alliances that they have, right? They feel more like partners with China and Russia versus the West or their former colonial masters like France or the UK in the context of Nigeria. So what they are trying to do is make the best use of the opportunity that they have right now. It's no longer like the Cold War where they had two options between the Soviet Union and the United States. They see it more as a multipolar world where there's so many players, so many options, and how do we leverage this relationship to what they call create the Africa that we want, right? They know that there are disadvantages with some of these deals that are brought to them. But would you rather infrastructure or would you rather tide aid? That's the big question mark. And for most African leaders, infrastructure wins.
So we've tied our aid to a lot of different strings over time. And John, one of these has been the promotion of democratic values, right? A cornerstone of the American way. So how will the upcoming elections affect that? Is that going to continue to be central?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. I think the challenge will continue to be in the past, right? It was pretty easy to make a compelling argument that, look what you get. Look what you get if you can be democratic, if you allow your citizenry to participate in the process. Look at what you get. The clear contrast could be, look at us, United States and the West, versus the Soviet Union or something. You see the contrast, you see democracy pays off, it is good. Now that's not so clear. You have countries like China being a prime example who have shown that no, maybe that's not necessarily a necessary ingredient for a prosperous country or something. The case has to be made that no democracy is an end in itself, that just people having a voice in the government that oversees, their lives and controls what happens within their borders, that's an end in itself, and that should be something that everyone wants and can subscribe to. But that's a fairly lofty ideal, and it's not unreasonable for people to instead think of the material benefits, the day-to-day benefits that democracy would bring. And it's harder for the United States, I think. It's like, hey, try out what we're doing. And a reasonable response would be like, why? It just seems like a mess. What's going on in your country, the misinformation, the polarization, it just seems very, very messy. And so why would we want that? So I think it's a challenge maybe in ways that it wasn't in the past, to really push for democracy as something that other countries should aspire to. The big caveat I would say there is that the US, I don't know, we probably don't need to push the Electoral College. Countries could do without that probably, but democracy otherwise is good.
Well, thank you for that, John. Sylvia, I did not skip you. I left you for last intentionally because I wanted to ask you, how does the potential prospect of a female president of the United States potentially influence global power structures?
In the most amazing way. Yay.
Okay, we have like 1 minute left. So for my last question, you get a one-word answer, okay? So think about it carefully. Looking ahead to the next 20 years of the CGA, so 20 years from now, what will be the key determinant of power? Does anyone want to go first? Sure. Michael? Okay, one word. One word, maybe one sentence. 5.
Thank you. Can you use your hard power wisely?
Ooh.
Gender equality.
managing energy and technology revolutions?
Flexibility and innovation.
Accurate information.
Thank you so much to our distinguished panelists. It's such an honor to be a part of the CGA community. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists.
I don't think it's been 14 years since we've seen each other.
Please now welcome David Sharia, Director, Chief of Branch, United Nations Security Council, Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, CTED.
Thank you all, and thank you for inviting me. I just listened to the previous conversation about and the attempts to gather more optimism than pessimism, and it reminds me of the famous quote that the difference between a pessimist and an optimist is 30 years of experience. But that's not the reason I was invited. I was actually invited to represent the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate of the UN Security Council, which is a professional body supporting the UN Security Council, as its name suggests, on counterterrorism. It was established a few years after 9/11, and since then, we're basically advising the Council and the Counterterrorism Committee of the Council on all global counterterrorism policy issues. And indeed, we are among the many credits that we have and the many areas of pride that we have is that we were the first to establish such strong cooperation with the Global Center that exists for 12 years. And we're very proud of it. And in the video that you will see in a few minutes, you will hear what the students and the faculty benefits from this cooperation. And what I would like to do in hopefully not more than 3-4 minutes is to share with you what we get from it as clients, quote unquote. So the first thing we, and I could say here in I, get from this cooperation is wonderful friendships with Caroline, Michael, Mary Beth, Vera, and many others on the faculty that we have such close cooperation that turned into close friendships that last more than a decade. And that in itself is worthy of the investments of both sides, at least as far as I'm concerned. What else do we get? We get access to top talent. And the top talent beyond the faculty of the center is the students themselves, which over the years I learned to appreciate. I learned to learn so much from how much they could contribute to global policy making. And beyond that, we get it for free, which is the biggest advantage. We don't even have to pay. They come and say thank you. So what else can we ask for? But the biggest advantage beyond that can be described in one word. This cooperation with the Global Center offers us what I would describe as a sandbox. The same sandbox where children play safely and explore new ideas without the risk of car hitting them is exactly what we need at the Security Council. And the reason we need it because we are, as I mentioned, dealing with the global challenges of counterterrorism. And before we present these concepts and ideas for global policy making to the Council, which, trust me, can be more than a truck hitting you if you present the wrong ideas, we played with them. And the best sandbox that we have is the Global Center, where we explore new ideas, new threats, new challenges in counterterrorism, and with a group of students try to think together what could be the ingredients of this global policy making. And over the years, we accomplished, and now I prepared for this event, the list of topics that we explored over the years. Each and every one of them was relevant, extremely relevant at the time, and even more relevant today. So the first year that we started this project was 2014, and the topics we discussed was the use of social media by terrorist organizations, and how can a global policy response to it could be shaped. Later on, it was developed into guidance, it was developed even into a Security Council resolution on the topic. In 2022, just as the war between Russia and Ukraine opened, we offered the students to think with us or to help us answer the question, what if terrorists get access to drones? I mean, of course they have, but what if they see what's happening in Ukraine and adapt it in new ways? Little did we know that the use of drones by terrorist organizations will be a major, major threat globally. But that helped us understand what could be the ingredients of a solution. And later on, it was developed to what is now referred to commonly as the global guiding principles on the use of drones, or the short name, the Abu Dhabi principles. And this semester, we just started it with another global challenge, which right now we don't have the answers on how terrorists will use artificial intelligence. There is a lot of research. Some say it's nothing, some say it's a new game changer. And hopefully with Professor Oppenheimer and with a group of students, we will be able to understand the challenge and understand what could be the ingredients of a solution that later can be proposed to the Security Council to begin political negotiations with very different views, but do it on evidence-based. We have many cooperation with many institutions, but I could say, and I'm not trying to be nice, this is by far the most advanced and the most fruitful cooperation we have with any academic institution. We have more than 100 academic institutions that are partnering with us, but clearly the center has been at the top, not just because of the commitment of the faculty, but also because of the practical hands-on approach. We are not academics. I mean, some of us have academic backgrounds, but we are not academics. We need to support a political policy-making process, and for that, the unique work of the Global Center helps us more than anything else. So thank you, and hopefully for another 20 years of cooperation.
Our consulting practicum program is something that we launched over 10 years ago, starting with a counterterrorism executive directorate at the United Nations. And we have over 13 consulting practica, and they really have become quite a signature part of the CGA program.
The consulting practicum is the best way to get, hands-on experience with real-world applications in a manner in which you really wouldn't see anywhere else.
This is higher education, it's graduate education, it's incredibly sophisticated training in responding to a real-world, timely question about a research problem or a practical dilemma. It's about high-level, high-quality education applied to the problems of the world today with a solutions-oriented perspective.
I was selected to participate in the practicum run by Dr. Altier that was done in conjunction with the Manhattan DA's office. We were tasked with addressing the transatlantic far-right linkages between US and Europe.
I was a graduate consultant at the Global Engagement Center at the US State Department. We were tasked with mapping global disinformation and misinformation programs within certain target countries.
I took part in the United Nations
Nations Foundation's consulting practicum. Here we did a comprehensive mapping. We looked at a lot of global digital governance initiatives, seeing what the landscape was. It was something inspired by the UN Secretary General's call for the Global Digital Compact. I'm very proud of the final report. It was a lot of work, but it was definitely worth it, and I'm very, very proud of the end product and the group that I got to work with.
These are really what I would call almost hyper-curated. So we have our full-time faculty that work with a very small group of students. They have this opportunity to not only build very unique relationships amongst their peers, but also with the faculty supervisor and with the representatives from the company, organization, or agency.
What was extremely important and helpful with Professor Oppenheimer was that he gave very direct feedback on what would work and what wouldn't. And there were so many other professors, and they were all incredibly helpful and involved both in the practicums and in helping, just facilitate some of the dialogues that we needed.
I think the best part about the consulting practicum with the United Nations Foundation was the ability to work with such a diverse group of people. We were able to work with an advisory board that the UN Foundation set up for us. So that included stakeholders like Google, Microsoft, the UN Tech Envoy's office. So being able to bounce ideas around and kind of see our research unfold in front of us, I think that was very valuable to take what was on the paper and be able to see it in real life.
The fact that there are so many different practicums available inside of CGA, you have the opportunity to interface with a lot of potential employers this way and learn the skills necessary to succeed in these jobs going forward.
I felt like I wasn't locked into my concentration, and really tapping into other fields at the CGA really helped me expand my view of global affairs and also utilize the resources that are available to me in the program.
Everything we teach at the Center for Global Affairs has a real-world application in the real policy world of international relations, whether it has to do with transnational security, women's rights, mediating peace talks, or working on internal security. So these kinds of things are useful to learn about in a real-world context or setting. And that's why the practicums are so valuable, because they're set in the context of actual problems that organizations that are in international relations face.
At the Center for Global Affairs, we are so deeply committed, and we thread applied learning throughout our curriculum. As soon as they sort of step foot, that they are professionals, and they are going to have, really unique learning opportunities that connect them to the careers that they came to us, that they have dreamt about, and this is sort of putting them on the pathway forward.
Please now welcome Shannon Lucas and Alexandra Rogan from the CGA Advisory Board to the stage.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Alexandra Rogan and a proud CGA alum from class of 2010-11, which I think dates me the most out of everyone who's been up here. So I'm also a member of the CGA Advisory Board.
And hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Lucas. Alexandra had to get it ahead of me by 1 year. But class of 2011, I graduated with a Master's of Science in Global Affairs, and I co-chair the advisory board along with my colleague Bob Pietrzak, who's here tonight. We wanted to talk to you a little bit about the advisory board, and I mentioned Bob specifically because he was here at the beginning, I believe, so you might outdate both Alexandra and me with your time with the program. The advisory board started with Dean Jelinek, and it was initially a group of trusted friends and advisors that Vera relied on to help her think through some big picture needs for the excuse me, I was gonna say foundation, I work at a foundation. But the group had leaders in various industries, including but not limited to business, legal, education, journalism, and nonprofit folks. We also have a few alums as members of this body today. And we meet a few times a year to help the leadership team of the CGA think about the big picture and a bigger strategic direction.
And Shannon and I joined pretty much about a year apart from each other. And we were among the earliest alums to come and sort of join the advisory group. So I think we've been especially proud of some of the events and convenings like this one that we've been able to support, and in particular conversations we've had with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, with former U.S. Ambassador to the UN and current Administrator to USAID, Samantha Power, who Shannon interviewed. And these types of events and many others that kind of bring our community and bring alums, current students, and others together are something that I think we enjoy the most from our participation.
So one thing that we were able to experience as students, but we witnessed with a different lens as members of the advisory board, is how hard the team works at CGA, the faculty and staff, and how dedicated they are. And we've learned as advisory board members, they do this because they love the work, but they also do it with limited resources. So before we go on, we just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge the faculty and staff, and could you all just join us in a round of applause for those folks? Okay, so now that we got the mood and the energy high, we talked about limited resources, and I will tell you plainly, we are here to ask you to contribute a donation to the Center for Global Affairs. Alexandra is going to tell you a little bit about the what you'll be contributing to, but before she does that, I'm going to give you a bit of information about how. I think a QR code is going to show up, love that. That is not the cocktail menu, but we are very close to drinks. What you can do is take out your phone, scan that QR code, and it will lead you to a donation page and a platform for you to think about giving. But I'll let Alexandra tell you a bit more about what.
Yes, so everyone can start getting out your phones. I don't see that many, but this is a time when it's okay to get out your phones while someone else is talking. So first of all, really there are three things we want to touch on, and you've heard them throughout everyone's remarks and discussions today already. But first, if you give, you're helping create a legacy of leadership for the future. And so it starts with the students, and for the past 20 years, CGA has empowered future global leaders like those you've seen speaking about, and many, many, many more, with the tools, the knowledge, and experiences to address an ever-changing world. And to hopefully stay optimistic in that, despite some of the conversation today. And so everything in terms of security issues, climate change, development priorities, your support is helping really shape those leaders, the next generation of leaders for the future. The second is a lot of what you've also heard about in terms of really impactful education and global solutions. So students at CGA push boundaries, they ask really tough questions, and they challenge the status quo. And through flagship programs like the Masters in Global Affairs, which Shannon and I graduated from, as well as the Masters in Global Security, Conflict, and Cybercrime, they gain real knowledge and practical skills to solve complex global issues. And your contribution can help sustain these programs, bring the resources to bear for them, provide scholarships to really be able to keep the best and the brightest coming and providing that next generation of leadership. And then finally, and probably one of the things that really appealed to me coming, even though I predated the there was a GFI that I couldn't go to, but is supporting that field work and real world solutions. So helping those students really get outside of the classroom. And I think David from CTED really pointed on the fact that this is something that our practicum partners get for free, but it's something that really you can, we know the amount of work that goes into this and particularly what it means for the students to be able to participate. And so what really sets CGA apart is that commitment to really experiential learning, and opportunities like those GFIs and the practica to really put students at the front lines of solving global challenges, questions that are posed to them, really helping them transform that worldview and preparing them to really lead on professional space afterwards.
Phones.
Yeah, still not seeing enough.
So some of you may know, when I started at the CGA, I went as a part-time student, and I was working full-time as a fundraiser. And I'm incredibly proud of, if I can take a second to say, I was a successful fundraiser and raised hundreds of millions of dollars for nonprofits. But when I really think about what I accomplished, I'm proud of the participation numbers in those campaigns. And so folks often think, well, I don't have, $1,000 to contribute to the CGA. What we're asking you tonight is just to participate, which is why I'm being a little obnoxiously, I see some phones, about the phones. Participation is a level of engagement. 20 years is a long time, but it's also not a long time when you think about where this program can grow. And we want folks to be in the habit of participating and committing to this program and helping us on the trajectory to make the next 20 years of leadership at the CGA.
So we'll stop there. Thank you for your time, for listening to Shannon and I. We look forward to chatting with you over drinks, and get out your phone. Thank you.
Okay, I promise it's time for a drink. I know I want a drink. I'm sure others are ready for a cold beverage. But I would really just like to extend my sincerest thanks to all those who contributed to this evening's program. The panel was fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Haass, for your very optimistic, uplifting words. Thank you for saying no to the Mets game. I got a little bit nervous when you weren't coming in, that maybe you had decided to go to that Mets game. Many thanks to all of the faculty that are here, to our phenomenal students, to our alumni, to our advisory board, to our CGA friends, those from the NYU leadership. We are deeply grateful. We really do hope that everyone is here that will stay and have a cold beverage, will enjoy some food, and will enjoy chatting with maybe some of your classmates, your faculty, new friends. But thank you very much. Thank you for helping us celebrate and mark CGA's 20th. Okay, thank you all so much.